You're listening to 5 Things with Lisa Birnbach.
Hi, it's Lisa Birnbach. Happy New Year. Happy new decade. I hope you've recovered from New Year's Eve, which is often a giant disappointment. That's a secret that we all share and never say, but it's severely overrated and it's an underperformer because it's just a night. Your life doesn't usually change unless you're Harry and Sally in an old movie. But anyway, we've done that. If you're going to start Dry-Nuary, you've probably started. I hope you're still sticking with it because it's January 3rd or after. And do it or don't. Don't do it on my account. I'm not doing it this year. I participated last Dry-Nuary 2019, realized that January is an extremely long month, 31 days. And you know what? It didn't change my life at all. So I'm not doing it. Let's check ourselves for bruises and try to begin again. I love making resolutions. Occasionally, I actually make one that sticks a little bit. Let's summon our better selves and move on to the new year, even though we know January 1st is basically December 32nd, if you catch my drift. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed your holidays. I did. Our guests today are 2 old pals of mine, Bruce Handy and Joe Queenan. They are both hilarious and thoughtful writers whose paths crossed with mine first at Spy Magazine, or at least Spy TV. And by the way, if you remember Spy, what I missed most about it was not editing it or being part of the cool kids who put it out, but I really enjoyed reading it. And I was always so shocked that they would make fun of rich and powerful people. Ooh, they weren't scared, and it was a great read. Anyway, we are not going to really be talking about Spy, although it will come up. We will be talking about the Peanuts anthology called the Peanuts Papers, to which we've all contributed. That's right. Our paths cross again. But first, my list of 5 things. Number 1, Hubbub. I had so much hubbub at home. I had my family and my exhibits and a lot of exhibit-adjacent people underfoot for the big holiday week. I cooked a lot. I seemed to be at the supermarket constantly. And when I was not at the supermarket, methinks I was loading and unloading and loading and unloading the dishwasher multiple times a day. That's okay. I just enjoy taking care of my little chickadees and the baby and my son's son, I called Exhibit E, but some of you said he should be Exhibit A1. I don't know. We can take a vote. What makes sense? Maybe A1. Anyway, he and I played, I would say, a historic game of hide and seek that gave him such belly laughs that I fell deeply in love. He is moments away from accepting his Rhodes Scholarship, okay? He's just that advanced. And he started crawling this week, although in California, but he's still crawling. Number 2, Bamba. However you pronounce it. It's not the socks, which are very nice. It's the Israeli peanut snack. The first time I tried this food, I have to be honest, I found it repellent. It looks like a cheese doodle, but it disappoints you if you're looking for cheese because it tastes like peanut butter. Now, I love it. I mean, you just have to be warned that it's not going to taste like cheese, but it's very Well, it's just salty enough, and it's addictive. And I've had them in my house just as a snack food, but they are used in Israel and may have been invented for this purpose for babies to chew on because they're very easily, they melt sort of in your mouth. And it's said that it prevents peanut allergies, which have become so prevalent. I mean, I lived on peanut butter and jelly, as did my brothers. Nobody I knew was allergic to peanut butter, and now everybody is, except in Israel, where they eat these Bambas. Anyway, my son and daughter-in-law love them so much that we went through many bags with the baby and us, and they're good. So, number 3, There is a column in the New York Times that I have linked to on my website at lisabirnbach.com. It's a thoughtful question by a woman who turned 40 and is clearly looking hard at her life. The question was, seriously, how do I find beauty and meaning in my life? Now, yes, it's a privileged question. She's not saying, how can I feed my children on half a salary? Or how can I deal with my partner's drug addiction? She's asking how to find beauty and meaning in life. But I found her willingness to be candid and honest and open, though withholding her name, impressive. And all our lives could be improved with meaning and beauty. Whether it's going to the park to admire a landscape, or going to a gallery or a museum to see a picture, or going online to see a painting, or listening to music, or reading a poem that you love. It helps. I swear it does. Okay, number 4, because it's the new year and we can only have hope at this time, I want to share with you a feel-good story about a community, a very close community, in which, this is a true story, and the link is on my page also. A community learned that a new family had moved in, and they had a child who was hard of hearing or completely deaf. And this neighborhood decided, mostly empty nesters, they decided to study American Sign Language so they could communicate with this little girl. Can you imagine that? We think of our neighbors as strangers or enemies or those weirdos down the street, but it's the best kind of story about strangers moving into our midst. And of course, it's just a win-win-win-win-win. And so is number 5, the medical breakthrough reported in the Australian press, in which a vaccine has been developed over 2 decades that has proven effective, get this, in reversing the symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia in mice. Human trials are set to begin by 2022, which, if you've been keeping count, is just 2 years from now. That is thrilling. And now, coming up, Bruce Handy, author of Wild Things, The Joy of Reading Children's Literature as an Adult, and Joe Queenan, author of the memoir Closing Time. We all wrote essays for the Peanuts papers. We'll be right back. It's Lisa Birnbach, and I'm sitting in the studio with writers Joe Queenan and Bruce Handy, and they are both journalists. We all worked at one time, not maybe together, but at Spy Magazine, which was a fantastic place to work. And if you don't know what Spy was, ask your mom or dad. And Joe writes for the Wall Street Journal. His column is bi-weekly, bi-monthly?
Yeah,
I never know the
difference.
Every other week.
Yeah.
Which is that? Is that bi-monthly?
Beats me. Just as long as I get paid, I don't care.
Bi-weekly, I believe.
That's bi-weekly?
Yeah.
Okay. And Bruce Handy writes for a lot of places, and he's the author of Wild Things, Reading Children's Literature as an
something like
adult?
The Joy of Reading Children's Literature as an Adult. I never thought I would write a book with joy in the title, but there you have it. I did.
One surprises oneself at a certain point, right?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And we are here because they have both contributed wonderful essays to the Peanuts papers, which is an anthology put together by Andrew Blauner, who puts together anthologies, writers and cartoonists and Charlie Brown, Snoopy and the Gang, and the Meaning of Life. And even I wrote an essay for it. And we are brought together by this unlikely theme, because I would love to have conversations with the two of you any old time. But when you were asked to write an essay about Peanuts or the whole Peanuts thing, for you, Bruce, you had just written a book about children's literature, and it's sort of your wheelhouse now.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And that seemed like a kind of a natural way into Peanuts. I proposed 2 different essays. I proposed essentially the essay I ended up writing, which was kind of looking at Peanuts both as literature for children, which in some senses it is, and in many senses it's not, and also what it has to say about children, to an adult reader. And I also pitched an essay about Shermie, who I always thought was kind of an interesting sort of character, who starts out in the early days of Peanuts and then kind of disappears. Andrew was much more interested in the kind of children's literature approach, but I did manage to wedge in Shermie at the end there. It was fun to go back and investigate that, and part of the process was, obviously I read Peanuts a ton as a kid, and but I hadn't really looked at it in a while, except in the sense that when always Peanuts is kind of in the atmosphere, so one always sees it. But going back, and I still have my old collections and reading them. It was kind of shocking. I was surprised how kind of often sort of nasty and cruel the strip is. Obviously we all know Charlie Brown gets picked on, but sometimes it's just it's almost, I don't want to be pretentious, but it's almost like this kind of Dostoevskian despair that Charlie Brown is submitted to. And it's interesting reading Joe's essay, where I think you came out with a much more sort of positive, view of what Peanuts is doing, which is interesting to me about the strip, because it can be interpreted in so many different ways and come at it from so many different angles.
Yeah, and adults ruin life, as we know. And I think that was one of the things that I loved about that comic strip, was they kept the adults out of it. And like all the other things, like The Better Half or any of those cute little things, would always have this sort of exasperated mother and father. They didn't have any of that. They had their own universe, and I thought that's what I really liked about it. And there was one strip that I cut out and kept, because I got so many rejection slips when I first started writing. And you get rejection slips because you're dealing with adults. You're 25 and you're sending your stuff to people in their 50s who have no sense of humor and who are past it, and they're sending you things, this does not suit our current needs. Or it would just be better to say, it's horrible, it sucks, I don't want to read this, okay? So there was a Snoopy one where he gets this rejection letter, and it says, "We notice that you have not sent us any manuscripts recently. Pause. This suits our current needs." And anybody who had ever been an aspiring writer would identify with that in a way that, I would never identify with Charlie Brown or with Lucy, but I could identify with that because he was an aspiring writer.
And I totally understood Charlie Brown's relentless attempt to kick his ball or to not be picked on, because I was totally bullied in school. And every time it happened, I was shocked anew. And I know that, I guess, adults reading the cartoon strip would think, why is he even bothering to play football with these people? And why does he expect the outcome to be different? But, we're insane.
Well, Charlie Brown, I think, is kind of, I think that's sort of, that was something I also I found, re-engaging with it as an adult. I think there's something heroic about Charlie Brown's perseverance. He has, I kind of wrote about this in my essay a little bit. When our daughter was first born, my wife's aunt gave us a card, and she said in the card, I wish for Zoe, my daughter, to have a passion, which at the time I thought was a little bit weird. Yeah, but I didn't really get what she meant. But then as kids got older and I saw that, kids who really do have passions, they do interesting things in life, and, people without passions become, I don't know, bankers or whatever. I don't know. But I just think, Charlie Brown has a passion. I think, Charlie Brown, obviously he has a miserable childhood, but, I bet, if Charlie Brown existed, he might be a kind of interesting adult. He might be somebody you might like to know and hang out with, because, you have to be a little bit, nuts, but in an interesting way to keep trying to kick the football.
In 2008, I was going down with my daughter from New York to Philadelphia to see the last game of the World Series, and my kids had never seen any of the Philadelphia teams, because I'm from Philadelphia. They had never seen any of the teams win, not one of the four teams. 25 years, never won. And I said to my daughter that day, I said, why do we do this? And she said, well, you read The Myth of Sisyphus, right? And I said, yeah. And she goes, Sisyphus wouldn't push the rock up the hill if he didn't think it was worth it. And it's like, from the mouths of babes,
wow.
And then she said, do you remember the last line of The Myth of Sisyphus? And I said, no. And she said, and so we imagine Sisyphus happy. So that's
Wow.
Charlie Brown. You're doing it because you do think it's worthwhile, no matter how frustrating it is. And that's a really valuable lesson for people to learn.
And how old was your daughter when she was like remembering the last line of Sisyphus?
25.
Wow.
She was 25. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
you win parenting in this
Yeah.
studio. You win it. I mean, that's a very high level conversation to have about baseball and about football or about life.
Yeah, and there's also that amazing thing that happens. It has certainly happened with my parents when I was about 12, where my parents realized he's so much smarter than us. Because my parents were blue collar, and the same thing happens with your children, hopefully, where at a fairly early point you realize she's a lot smarter than me. You know, I'm still making more money, maybe, but she's just smarter than me.
Yeah, you know,
My
it's,
kids are a lot smarter than me, too, in case they're listening.
Yeah,
I'm just
and
going to
my-
add that.
yeah, and mine are much smarter, and they can do math, which, you know, is hopeless for me. The quest of these kids and their independence was always so interesting to me, that they had a very organized life without grown-ups. I mean,
Well, they do. I mean, the grown-ups are there. You know, they're still going. They still have to go to school. You know, the teachers are off screen. You know, there are references to parents off. I mean, it's not like
right.
It's not like
Lord,
Lord
of the Flies.
Exactly.
Right.
Actually, it should have been. That would have been really interesting if they had all ended up on an island together.
Yeah, but by the way, when you talk about a grown-up Charlie Brown, I imagined him to be Michael J. Pollard as an adult.
I don't imagine him ever being grown up. Ever. I mean, you know, there was a play on Broadway about 20 years ago, which was about Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer when they grow up.
Right.
And one of them is a drunk and a loser, and the other one, I think, had, like, it was a child molester or something. I don't know exactly what, but it was just a terrible idea. Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn must always, just like Scout. Scout can't grow up.
Can't grow
Can't
up.
grow
Right.
up. No,
Right.
because it's always going to be. It's going to be, you know, it's just going to be a disappointment. It's better to have them in that. That's what's so great about fiction is, you know, Jane Eyre, that's it. She's married now. She's with Rochester, and she's about 30, something
And she's
like that.
done. Yeah.
And she's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, what's amazing to me is that Peanuts has the longevity that it does. I mean, it does seem to be newly apropos. People still love the TV specials, which still air every year around this time, don't they?
Yeah, well, certainly the
Christmas
one does, yeah.
Right, and the Halloween one does, the Great Pumpkin,
And the Christmas music is pretty inescapable this time of year.
once
Right.
you get lodged into the American consciousness, you have to work really hard to get dislodged. So, like, I remember when I was working at Barron's, they did a story where they went back and looked at companies from the 1920s that were still selling products like, you know, Tide detergent or Kellogg's cornflakes or, you know, Ford cars. And I think that Peanuts is like that, that once you have established yourself as you're part of this culture, you really have to do something awful to get dislodged. You're just there.
Peanuts gets canceled. Yeah, it would be. It turned out. Charlie Brown was. Anyway, I'm not going to pursue that thought.
No, don't go there.
But you know, I think that's a good point, though. But also, I think, and one thing that was valuable to me in doing this project, and both in terms of writing my own piece and then reading, you know, the rest of the book, was reminding really how rich Peanuts is. Because I think, in the sense that a lot of Peanuts is kind of lodged in the American cult. You know, in the American consciousness right now, a lot of it is kind of the more, you know, kind of banal, sweet, sort of late period Peanuts. You know, it's like Snoopy and Woodstock and, you know, Spike and you know, this horrible, what is it, Metropolitan Life ads. I mean, the whole thing is really, to the extent I think a lot of people, probably a lot of younger people, might think of Peanuts. Their version of Peanuts, I think, is a very neutered, you know, version of Peanuts compared to if you go back and look at the strips, especially I think from the, you know, maybe from the mid 50s through to the maybe mid 70s, which to me would be, you know, roughly when it's at its peak and it's most creative, and it's often very dark, and it's often very, very, very bleak. I mean, there's one comic strip that I wrote about in my essay that I was kind of shocked to see. It's Charlie Brown. it's Valentine's Day. It's a classic thing. He's watching the little red-haired girl, pass out Valentines, and he's kind of his monologue is like, she's giving one here, she's giving one there, she's coming here, she's not coming here, she's done, and then he's just sitting there. And then the last line is he's got this amazing. I mean, it's also just a real tribute to Schultz's drawing ability. He's got his mouth is just kind of this weird wiggly sort of frown. You can tell he's just about to. It's just capturing that moment right before you break out in tears. It's really brilliant draftsmanship, and the quote unquote punchline of the piece is "Happy Valentine's Day." I mean, that's it. It's not even a joke. It's just like it's horrible.
It's horrible.
And that's a very far thing from like Snoopy and Woodstock in a Metropolitan Life ad.
Well, and also it's very dark and in a way very progressive thinking for this man in Santa Clara or wherever Santa Rosa, North California, who was kind of relegated to kids, funny papers, but was a very profound thinker.
Well, it's
boy, do I relate to that Valentine one, by the way.
Well, and so does everybody. I mean, that's the thing. You look at this thing, and I mean, I don't know about you guys. I look at this and this is dark, and in some ways, it's like, I mean, obviously a lot of it's funny and brilliant, but a lot of it is like, well, how. Peanuts is like one of the most popular things ever, right? Peanuts is up there with like the Beatles and Harry Potter. I mean, in terms of mass popularity, but it's also like the Beatles and Harry Potter. In some ways it's really weird and singular and very particular. It's very much of this one guy's mind.
Yes,
I was in Chicago about 10 years ago doing a radio program for the BBC about Al Capone and Eliot Ness, and I went with somebody from the Chicago Historical Society to the place where the St. Valentine's Day Massacre took place. And by the time that massacre took place, Al Capone had killed about 1,000 people, and nobody cared. Absolutely nobody cared. And that day, they violated a number of rules. The Italians came from the south side. The north side was the Irish. They did it in plain daylight. They did it right across the street from a school. And they dressed up in cops' uniforms. But the thing that turned the entire country against Al Capone was they did it on Valentine's Day. And the American people said, what kind of people are these? It was such a major moment. And from
wow.
that, yeah. And it's like, I'm not going to mention names, but you always hope with evil people. Evil people are lucky until they're not lucky. And you just keep hoping that, I won't mention anybody by name, but you just hope for that St. Valentine's Day Massacre Day where they do the one thing that people are like, oh, no.
Yeah, like make fun of a captured war hero, or make fun of a Gold
Norwegian
Star family,
girl.
and then it's all gone. Yeah, it all just blows up.
But that's the thing is you keep wondering what is the moment when, there is the moment where, like George Bush the first, the thing with the scanning the socks. And all of a sudden, the American people realize he doesn't know what a scanner is. He's not like us. All that stuff about eating pork rinds and, a shotgun shack in Texas. And,
horseshoes.
It's all we now realize. And, you keep hoping that moment will occur.
Yeah, but maybe it will.
When I wrote my essay was written for The Guardian a few years ago. And it was written to explain what this was, why it was such a big phenomenon. So you have an advantage when you're explaining something, when you don't have to guess, well, they'll know that. And you have to tell the whole story and put it in historical context. And that's a really great form of writing, because you can just take all the information that you have, and it's as if you were talking to a child. Mm-hmm. And that's where my essay came from. And I didn't have any particular attachment to that comic strip, except that when we were young, those things dominated the world because there weren't that many things. It
was a quieter, slower world that we grew up in.
People read the comics. People did the crossword puzzle. And now, of course, everything's fragmented. So, you talk to people and they go, have you watched Ozark? No. It's great. Okay, but I was watching The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel or something.
Yeah.
And there's no thing that's going to, except professional football, there's no thing that's going to unite everybody. And those things were culturally dominant. And that's how they imprinted themselves on the consciousness of the people.
But do you guys ever, I find sometimes like I'll be in the subway and there'll be some billboard, especially in September when, there still is sort of a fall season for TV and broadcast. And there'll be some like CBS cop show or something. It's like, back for its 10th season. I'm like, I've never even heard of this show.
Yes.
But it's been around for 10 years. It's probably got a much bigger audience than, Mrs. Maisel or, Watchmen, the things that my Twitter feed are,
Right.
sort of obsessed with at the moment.
I find that all the time, but I also find...
We are out of it, coastal elites.
Yes, we are.
But we're older. That's
Yeah.
the other thing is we're
Yeah.
older.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then conversely, you talk to young people and you say you were at the Buffalo Bill Museum and they think Buffalo Bill is a character from Silence of the Lambs, have never heard of Buffalo Bill, have
Wow.
never heard of Buffalo
Wow.
Bill. Right.
I do miss very much the commonality of what we shared in Philadelphia, in Palo Alto, in New York. We still had a lot of similar touchstones because we had the Peanuts cartoon strip. We watched Laugh-In wherever we were. And the news was something that was manageable because you only watched it once a day. And the paper came out every morning, and the evening paper. People don't understand that either.
No.
Every American city of any size had more than two papers, and those two papers might or might not reflect different political leanings. And you knew that if you wanted to read something that was pro-war, you'd read this. And if you wanted something that was more pacifistic, you'd read that.
Kids, it was like having Fox News and MSNBC in print.
But yet, the broadcast news was neutral.
Yeah.
Right? Didn't we
Well,
understand?
Nixon, I mean, I would agree with you. Nixon wouldn't have agreed with you. But.
Right. But didn't we understand that the delivery system was supposed to be unbiased?
Well, that was, yeah. I mean...
But people on the right didn't believe that. They always felt that look, when I worked at Forbes magazine, Forbes magazine was run by extremely conservative people, okay? But the staff, which is more than 100 people, is 100 journalists who live in New York. There's two conservatives on the staff. Everybody else is a wishy-washy liberal collecting a paycheck, working for a conservative publication. But of course, journalists were always going to lean to the left. It's like when people say, well, what do you think people on Wall Street are like? They all lean to the right. They're capitalists. The idea that the media would not be slightly to the left, which is what it is. It's slightly to the left. Why would that astonish people? It's young people. It's people who live in New York. It's people who live in Chicago. Of course they're more liberal than you are.
And they're it's people who are questioning by nature,
And curious and are not doing their job in order to become rich.
But I would say one thing about what we're talking about, which is if you went back 4,000 years, my son and I were talking about this one time, which was the whole back in the good old days conversation, which is in 1830, if you got French people together, they would be going, in 1789, people really knew how to work a guillotine. I mean, people, my dad was like a tumbril repairman. And it's like, it's just an inevitable part of life. I think the hard thing for people to understand, first of all, every kid should read Death of a Salesman, because that tells you this is what's going to happen to you, okay? And it's not, and it comes to the point where, okay, person's in their 60s and they're thrown out in the street and their argument is, but I have skills that young people don't have. Nobody cares.
Right.
The world doesn't care. The world moves on, and this is the way it's always been. So, I mean, I would love, you see like people like Volcker. Volcker died and he was 91, I think, or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm 69. I would love to live into my 90s so that I can hear my kids going, oh, my God, when I was young, it was so much better. People knew who Beethoven was.
Sisyphus.
And people held the door for you at the 9:30 club.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I just think it's...
Hey, can I amend something I said earlier? I was talking about that journalists being, sort of as... we were all talking about journalists being kind of inherently somewhat skewed to the left, and I think I said something like, they were questioning. I didn't mean to imply that conservatives aren't questioning or curious. I think what I was trying to get at, the idea that I do think there is something inherently kind of anti-establishment about what propels you into journalism, because you want to sort of pick at things and maybe that isn't inherently a leftist
and,
impulse.
And the people who had the skills to be great journalists on the right became investment bankers. Journalism doesn't pay well, certainly not anymore, not since the internet came. So, of course, people, if the right wants great journalists, then they have to have people willing to work for $35,000 a year.
Yeah. What do you think about the online publishers who say to you or me, quite seriously, I know we don't pay, but we get a lot of views?
I always say the same thing.
Yeah.
A kiss on the cheek may be quite continental, but diamonds are a girl's best friend.
Yes. Yeah, I always say, all those views don't pay tuition. But
I used to say, I love writing so much, I would do it for nothing. And now I'm being put to the test. I mean, a lot of publications like overseas that you used to work for, they can't pay you anything now. I mean, you're doing a public service by writing for them. I'll do it.
Guess what? It is a public service,
It is a public service, though, right.
I agree. I think there's something inherently, not just the curiosity of the journalist, but I think the goodness of the journalist. When I read about Julie K. Brown, the reporter in Miami who uncovered the Jeffrey Epstein crimes and who really got the show back on the road with him, she worked on that story for 2-3 years. Nobody wanted to help her. Nobody saw it going anywhere. She didn't do it for glory. She was also raising a family and getting a staff salary.
Yeah, but those kinds of reporters, as opposed to a lot of younger reporters, are terriers. And once they get their teeth into the thing, they're not going to let it go. And they're not just going to do internet searches. They're going to go out and they're going to talk to people. And that's a big thing. You have to go out and talk to people.
But also, and there's still, at least, in some cases, hopefully there's still enough infrastructure to support these people. I mean, that's a problem. I've worked with investigative journalists as an editor, and sometimes you have to be willing to let somebody go for like a year or longer to pursue something. Yeah, you said it took her 2 years to get that story. And it used to be, there used to be so many more outlets that would support that work, and now it's becoming harder, or it literally becomes, nonprofit work. Like I think ProPublica or Publica, I don't know how to say it.
I think it's a
Publica.
And there's also the thing that if you're going to do a story about the mob, for example, or the Russian mob or any number of people, if you're not doing that under the aegis of the New York Times or the Washington Post, you shouldn't do it. You will not have any kind of protection. So that's one of the things, too, is that those institutions are so important because they can give journalists a certain cover.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Or certainly, a lot of the Me Too story, exactly. I mean, going after Harvey Weinstein without, the New York Times backing you up on a potential libel suit, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, look what NBC did. Yeah. I mean, they buckled on that one.
Everybody was terrified
of what Hearst Magazine, or what, Hearst Corporation did with the Bryan Singer story. I happen to know something about.
Yes, that's right.
And the, what's his name? The Madoff, okay.
Right.
People knew that story. People knew he was telling people 12% return, 12% return, 12% return. People in the financial press knew, but they were afraid of him.
Wow.
Barron's came close.
I didn't know that it was well known.
Barron's came close to doing it and just backed off at the last minute, I think, because it was just he's got too much money. But people knew that there was something wrong with that story. There was just something wrong with it.
And, of course, as we later read many times in many places, if you were a client of Madoff's, you were so excited. If you were not a financial savant, you would look at your return with 12%, 12%, 12%, and put it away and not want to, what I don't know, I don't want to know. But if you called your friend who was a client, you would see that report was identical. They didn't even bother to create individual reports for people.
Yeah. They could have layered it like 6% for you, 9%.
Yeah,
no.
Exactly.
But you know what?
How many people share their financial? I mean, isn't that like the biggest privacy of all?
It's a taboo to talk about.
I mean, that was like when my wife and I got together. I mean, those are the very, I don't think we merged, we lived together for like, several years before we got married, but I don't think it was until after we actually got married that we finally merged our bank accounts. Like that was the hardest conceptual.
I think it is very private and very embarrassing to talk about money. I was raised to not talk about it.
We didn't
Period.
have any, so we didn't talk about it. But
I mean, we all worked together. I had no idea what you guys were making. I hope you don't know what.
I absolutely, this is one of the things about being a freelance writer is I would never, first of all, I never pitched a story, ever. Once somebody said, I want you to write a story for Esquire or something, they would say, what do you want? I would say, well, how much are you going to pay me? Because I can't stand talking about money. I can't stand it. And so I would just say, how much is it? And if it wasn't enough, I would say, well, I need a little bit more. But I hate discussing it. And sometimes over the years, people have this idea that if you're a freelance writer, it's precarious, right? Life is precarious, but being a freelance writer means you don't have to go to work. So freelance writers are wired in a completely different way where it's like, what would be the most terrifying thing for most people? I lose my job. I don't have any money. What would be the most terrifying thing for me? I have to go to work. But
wait, we do work. We just don't necessarily go someplace.
Right, but you don't know necessarily you're going to get paid. You're going to not get paid. But
you get to work in sweatpants. That's the big excitement.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But the thing is that people will say, how do you... how do you know how much you're going to work and how much did you get for that? And, if you were on Dynamist, and I just say, well, do you want to send me tax returns? Can I see your tax returns? That's my business, how much money I make. And it's the same way with my kids. If my son asks me how much money do you make, none of your business.
Right.
You'll find out soon enough when I've spent it all.
When you have to fill out those forms. By the way, I hope I got paid as much as either of you on this Peanuts book, because I only got paid a few months ago, and I'm just going to put up my hand. I got this many hundreds.
Yeah.
Did you? Did you get more? You got more, Bruce. Yeah, he
did.
But
I'd already been paid for my column.
By the Guardian.
Yeah.
So you double dipped.
It was funny. It was found money.
Nice. I got paid less than you. And as a friend of mine says, as being a freelance journalist, which is a dream come true in a way, he says, I get paid in the hundreds and my bills are in the thousands.
It's funny, though, because now you don't get checks anymore. And we got a check for that. I love when you get a check. Because for one thing, when I get a check, that money does not belong to my wife or my household. That goes into the special account to buy stupid stuff. And so royalty checks are the same thing. You get $300 for something published in Australia. But that rarely happens anymore. Nobody pays by check.
Hey, how many people invite you to lunch these days?
Oh my God, that's the worst thing about it. I do legacy lunches now, where I take people to lunch from GQ who used to take me to lunch because they're not working anymore.
Right.
And I liked being a journalist, but I really liked the limos. When I was writing for GQ, I'd be with my friend and we'd go to the Union Square Cafe for lunch and they would limo us back and forth. It was just, oh my God.
I never had limos, but I did love the lunches.
I love
the
lunches.
We lived through we lived through the end of a golden era or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Really the end, because I think 20, 50 years ahead of us, they really lived it up. But
I was sitting in Dumbo.
Condé Nast in the 90s and early 2000s was still pretty good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You had a town car for every errand and
go to Paris for a week and be an ambassador to the French. Go to Hawaii. Go to Australia. Take the family.
Oh my God!
You know what? I was in Dumbo at the first time that I was ever at one of these things. I was at a book signing, and you had to pay to go to the book signing. $10 to pay to go to the book signing. I didn't pay because it was a friend of mine who got me in. And afterwards, a whole bunch of us went out to a tapas bar right around there. And one of them was Sam Tannehouse from the New York Times. And there was a guy named Jay Jennings, who's now the editor of the Oxford American. There were a few of us. And we had all worked for Sports Illustrated or Time Magazine or GQ. And we were all telling stories. And there was this young guy sitting there. We were just telling limos. And they sent me to Paris. And I did this and I did that. And there was this young guy sitting there. And finally, at one point, one of us said, "Boy, I really miss those days." And the guy looked at us and says, "It sounds to me like you sucked the whole thing dry."
Well, I think for those who had those jobs, really enjoyed them. They enjoyed the bar car at Time Inc. They enjoyed expense accounts. Lunch at the Royalton. And I guess if I were interviewing somebody who on a plane, which I like to do because you had their attention for so many hours.
Oh my God, if I'm sitting next to you on a plane, you suddenly start interviewing me. That's like the most frightening thing I've ever heard.
By
Sorry,
prearrangement.
No offense.
By prearrangement.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't just ambush somebody, but
I hate airplane conversations. That's like a phobia.
No, I don't talk to people on airplanes. Make no mistake. But if I were, let's say, going to interview John Denver on a plane, and
why'd you pull that example?
Because I did once do that.
Okay.
I did once do that. And he flies first class, so I have to fly first class. And there was a time, I think, that you'd get flown first class if you were going across the country anyway. But
yeah,
that was kind of the deal, or at least business class.
Yeah, those days are gone. Gone.
Yeah.
But you know what else? People don't know how to do real research because they think that it's just clicking Wikipedia.
I have a friend who teaches at NYU, and he literally teaches a class, the title of which is, something like, research beyond Google. Telling kids how to actually go to a library, look at an archive.
Yes. That's why I recommend that people watch All the President's Men, because that beautifully shot scene of Woodward and Bernstein in the rotunda of the Library of Congress is pretty great. If you see how many card catalog index cards they go through. Well, this has been a great conversation. Some of it about peanuts.
Yeah, we got pretty far afield.
Yeah.
But why not?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a treat to see the two of you and have a conversation.
Yeah, it's great.
And I think that's what everybody wants to hear anyway.
If they want more peanuts, they can go buy the book.
Okay, that's what I'm going to say. But first, you both came up with your list of 5 things, and we can't not do that. That would be breaking every rule in this show's handbook. So, Bruce, I want to start with you. Do you have a copy of your list?
Yes, I do. I see it right in front of me. Thank you.
Okay, good. So let's talk about your 5 things.
Okay. Well, first of all, I did a preface, which I'll read. My 5 things. Leave aside family and friends, which to my mind go without saying for our purposes here, but of course not in day-to-day life where, acknowledging and never taking your friends and family for granted is a rule to live by.
Yes, and you've already mentioned that your kids are much smarter than you and Helen.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Well, Helen, I don't know, definitely smarter than me. Helen is very smart. Helen is smarter than me too.
You've taken care of everybody.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so number 1.
Okay, so these are my things. So number 1 is collaboration, and I put that down partly because I've been involved in a project recently with a picture book project with an illustrator and an editor who are both great, and it's been a really sort of exciting just process and fun and kind of reminded me of how important collaboration was, which actually going back to talking about Spy, which was one of the great work experiences of my life, just because it was such a collaborative place and it felt like a lot of smart people pushing everybody to do better in a mostly we had our tiffs and whatnot, but mostly I thought in a healthy, constructive, fun, playful way.
Mm-hmm.
So take a lot of collaboration definitely makes my life better. I put New York City. I mean, that's just kind of a in some ways that was a catch-all. I was just thinking about New York and just in terms of being so kind of culturally rich and diverse place and how stimulating it is and I love being in a place where I can, walk to Lincoln Center and see a world-class opera or go across the street and see a movie in a Barca Lounger or, film forum and museums and all that, it's just, that's what makes life worth living. Obviously, New York is not the only place that has great culture. Similarly, I put down California as my 3rd thing. Again, kind of a little bit going into stereotyping, but, thinking of California as a place of physical beauty and outdoors life and great food and kind of certain sybaritic thing, which I think sort of balances New York. And I think both of having grown up in California, those things have contributed to me. I put Tony Bennett still being alive because every time I listen to him, obviously he's just so wonderful too. And it's just like he's still alive. He's still recording. He's still great. I mean, it's just like amazing that we
still
still have
painting.
Tony Bennett.
He's still upright.
I mean, that that makes life better.
I agree.
Not much more to say about that. And age, I was just saying, I don't know. I turned 61 last month, so I guess that's been on my mind. But I have my health, so things are good. So I like being older. Feel like I'm smarter. I don't know. Accumulated experience makes things more. I don't know. It's like studying history, right? I mean, it's like having your own history. But I truly believe in general, studying history makes you understand the world better. And certainly I think, having accumulated a certain amount of one's own history also, makes one kind of, just get more out of everything. So those are my 5 things.
One time I was talking to my son, and I was saying the only advantage to being older is I have the money. And he said, no, you know how your life turned out. That's a huge advantage.
Oh, wow.
Because if you're 27 and you're just starting out, you have no idea how your life, are you going to be successful? Because I remember when I was in my early 30s, the thought of not being successful was terrifying. Not the money part, but the idea of not being able to work as a writer was just an awful thought. And then, 30 years later, 40 years later, you've been doing it, and it's great. It's a great feeling.
Well, sometimes, I mean, it's interesting. I totally understand that. I mean, sometimes when I'm, if I'm frustrated by something or, have a, career setback or, whatever, or somebody reject, whatever, I'm just kind of, but I think back, okay, if I went back to 20 or 25 and said, okay, here's how it's going to, play out, I think my 25-year-old would be, that's pretty, I got to do stuff that I enjoyed, and I got to work with great people, and, I got to, it all worked out. I mean, it worked out well enough, so.
I sort of feel like I don't know how it's all going to end for me. I mean, I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I'm not signing off. I'm not signing off here either. Yeah, by the way.
I'm hoping the curve keeps going in some direction. That's up.
When I go into museums, I always look at how old the painter was when he painted these things, and it's amazing that you'll see people like Monet. He was painting in his 80s. Renoir was painting.
In his
Edward
80s.
Hopper was painting, and it's really Rembrandt painted fairly late. And then you hear stories about like Verdi retired at age 69 and then came out of retirement at age 81. So those things are always encouraging. Just see, because most people, to me, when people talk about retirement, that's basically death or golf, one or the other. But I mean, you basically have shut down the shop, and people who do stuff like us don't wake up one morning and say, okay, I've done it. I'm not going to do that. I don't have any more story ideas. And musicians are like that. Painters are like that. It'd be a drag to just say, yeah, I've done enough. And the reason they want to retire is because they hated their jobs for 40 years.
I would guess,
they hated them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I feel like, that's one thing I like about Gainwell, because I feel like I have more ideas and better ideas, and I don't know, more interesting than me. Maybe today's gatekeepers might not agree with me, but I like I don't know.
I also feel like
like getting old has made me better.
I feel more me than I've ever been.
But one thing that I think is very interesting is people say, do you ever go back and look at stuff that you wrote when you were young, and does it embarrass you? When I go back and look at stuff when I was like 28 or 29, that was it. You got to that level and you had better work habits, but you didn't become a better writer. You were locked in early. Musicians are locked in early, and and the other problem with writing satire is you're inevitably repeating yourself, because there's a particular setup to satire, which is you throw some stupid idea out there and then you go, I am certainly not suggesting, but you've done that like 1,000 times, because that's what satire is. Satire is there's a template and you just go in that direction. But I don't know if people. I don't know if people actually get better. I think they know more. But in terms of writing, I think you have such incredible energy and ebullience and excitement when you start out, and you feel like the English language belongs to you. And then time passes, and it shouldn't become autopilot. It shouldn't become boring, but it does become. You're not going to substantially improve the way you write. Not once you get into your 60s.
Okay. Good to know.
It's one of our, it's one of your sponsors, the AARP. I feel like I really skewed this whole conversation.
Okay, Joe, just do your 5 things, all right?
Okay, my 5 things. First, live classical music. And, of course, New York's a great place to be because you have orchestras. You can go to Juilliard 5 times a day and hear kids doing. And it's also, I love the Secret Handshake Society part to classical music is I literally never meet anybody I know when I go to Carnegie Hall or Avery Fisher Hall because journalists don't listen to classical music. I love the secret. I love the fact that this belongs to me and Riccardo Muti and Esa-Pekka Salonen. So that Philadelphia Eagles, been a fan since I was 13, watched the Eagles play the Redskins.
He's got an Eagles scarf on, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
Watched the Eagles play the Redskins yesterday on Skype with my daughter. So she had to get the game up on her computer, then put FaceTime on, and we Skyped for 3 hours. That girl really likes professional football. So that's
and she likes Sisyphus.
And she likes Sisyphus.
So you've done something right.
We were together the night the Eagles won the Super Bowl. We knew what it's like to push the rock up the hill.
So what was that? I mean, what was that like? Did that just...
It was the most amazing, except for my kids being born, it was the most amazing experience of my life. When the entire city is out on Broad Street. It was unbelievable.
Where were you when you watched it?
I was in Philadelphia. I didn't want to go to the Super Bowl. I wanted to be in Philadelphia. And as soon as it was over, we went out onto Broad Street, my wife, my daughter, and we stayed out till 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was absolutely fantastic. And we went into this diner that I've been going into since I was like 18. And they said, we don't have any rolls left, so can I serve you your cheesesteak on pita bread? And I said, just this once. And then I looked over at my daughter a few minutes later and I said, what are you eating? She said, I'm eating a cheesesteak. I said, I thought you were a vegetarian. She said, not tonight. So that's that. France, I went to France when I was 21. I lived there for a year, so I win over everybody. If you go to France, if you can live in Paris for a year, like Hemingway said, movable feast, best thing ever. Just great. And not having a job, I've talked about that at length. I just want that on my gravestone. Joe Queenan, didn't spend much time in the office. and then my kids is definitely, I think I put my kids there because we do say, like, my kids, of course, but my parents wouldn't have put kids on their list of the 5 favorite things. They just thought they were poor and they just thought it was a drag. And lots of people do not derive the kind of pleasure they should. When I talk to people and I say, how many kids do you have? And they say 5. And I go, where do they live? And I go, I live in Maine, Colorado. And I said, do you miss them? And they go, no. No one should ever say that. That's the worst thing imaginable to say that. Yeah.
I miss my kids now because they're not in this room with me.
Yeah.
That's normal,
Shaking
right?
us down for money.
But that's performative. Do I have to say that now, too? No.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for a very entertaining conversation. Thank you for listening to 5 Things That Make Life Better. My guests this week have been Joe Queenan and Bruce Handy, contributors to Andrew Blauner's The Peanuts Papers, writers and cartoonists on Charlie Brown, Snoopy and the Gang, and the Meaning of Life. And they got paid more than I did. Joe's Moving Target column appears in the Wall Street Journal bi-weekly.
Yes.
And you can follow Bruce on Twitter at Henry Effing James, which I've always loved. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play Music, YouTube, MyTube, AnyTube, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you get your podcasts. My blog is at lisabirnbach.com, and you will find links and photos to things that we discussed today. This podcast is produced in New York City by thefieldtv.com. My engineer is Jimmy Regan. My team is Spressa Arucci, Michael Port, Boko Haft, and Sam Haft. Until next week, stay dry and act natural. Bye-bye.
That was 5 Things with Lisa Birnbach. New episodes every Friday, if she remembers.